I wanted to talk a bit about a change in the terminology, the nomenclature that we're using to discuss Mattereum, which is we're going to start using this term digital twin more. Digital twin has been around as a term 10 or 15 years, apparently, in academia. Hasn't been widely used in industry. There's been a lot of debate about what it means, what it should mean, how people should use it. And a lot of this goes back to the original thinking around Hexair Capital, which is where we had lots and lots and lots of discussions with people, kind of roundtable format, dinner parties, trying to talk about the new technology between lots of different fields, lots of different disciplines, so that we could get to evolving new language. Because when you encounter genuinely new technology, this is a thing that Stuart Brand talks about. Says that one of the ways you know that technological innovation is happening is that there's new nomenclature. People are using new words to describe things that they haven't seen before. So we have been using these terms like asset passporting, we've been talking about smart property, we've been kind of casting around for a way of describing exactly how we think this blockchain digital interface is going to work properly. And what we've seen in the last less than a year, 6 months, is that the industry seems to be settling on the term digital twin to mean roughly the kind of thing that we're talking about. Our version of the digital twin story, because it goes through all the asset passporting stuff, is actually much more kind of legal, right? It's like the legal rights associated with the physical object or what we represent with highest fidelity. Other people that are doing things like engineering modeling are using the digital twin to mean something which is much more like finite element analysis, this kind of stuff. But we are kind of in a position where we're looking at the terminology shifting, and the blockchain people that we're most interested in talking with, the people that are doing supply chain management, the people that are doing sort of art, armor, artifact, this kind of stuff, all of that stuff seems to be beginning to converge on the use of digital twin as sort of the industry standard term for discussing this stuff. So given that we seem to be headed in that direction, this is one of those things where the terminology has come to meet us. It could have been the blockchain space would have come up with its own term. It might have been that it was some other term than digital twin that would have come across and become the standard term. Looks like digital twin is what people are using. So we are going to be sort of retooling the Mattereum communication stuff around the concept of digital twin. Doesn't change what happens at all. Digital twins have asset passports. It's a really simple thing. It's just that this blockchain representation of reality, we're going to latch the digital twin terminology onto that. We're going to use that as much as possible. Hopefully that will bring us into a little more, convergence with the rest of the way the industry is going. Because we've been out here kind of on a limb for quite a long time. When we started Mattereum, the idea that you were going to need, really high fidelity legal interfaces between the physical and the digital seemed extremely remote. Nobody was talking about security tokens. Nobody was talking about asset digitization in any kind of direct way. There was some notion that smart contracts would control the real world in some way. There was a bunch of discussion about using automated systems to do that. But what we didn't have was a kind of rich, dense legal dialogue with all the people that were attempting to move in that direction, because there weren't any. I mean, we were really, really far ahead of our time. We're now at the point where we are just about ready to ship some product. With all of these things, the deals tend to be a little bit complicated. There are many moving parts because you've got the physical people, the legal people, the digital people, the money people. There's a lot of to line up. But I think that in May you're going to see some quite impressive starting points, maybe. You're going to see something in May. Whether you're impressed or not is up to you. But we think it's impressive. And then what comes out of that is this, kind of the long straight push up the road. We've established the vehicle, we've got the thing on the rails. It's then basically just a question of pushing it forward, industry by industry, asset class by asset class, build the legal adapters, cross jurisdictional lines when we have to, build the adapters in each jurisdiction. It becomes, I don't want to say straightforward, but we're definitely at the end of the R&D phase. I think the I don't even want to say rebranding, it's still Mattereum, but I think the recasting of the story around the digital twin narrative, I think is going to be a big part of making that work legible to people. Right now we say asset passport, and if we'd used digital twin a year ago, very little discussion of digital twins, just a few people in the blockchain space using it. But two events that I've been to recently, the Odyssey Hackathon, what used to be Dutch Chain, 1,700 people, 1,500 people, lots of use of the digital twin terminology. Nobody blinked an eyelid. Everybody had gotten used to the term. Everybody knew roughly what it meant. Everybody kind of had their own story in their head about what digital twin was. So we'd crossed the threshold where digital twin was a foreign concept that had to be explained, to the point where people use digital twin like you use web server. They had nailed down that it had a meaning. Same thing when I was at the Blockchain Global event. All of those folks were totally comfortable with the terminology digital twin. So we just connect to that terminology, re-explain what we're doing in that context. And it just works, right? I mean, this should be the way that everything ties together. I guess there are two other bits I want to talk about before I wrap up. So the other thing I want to talk about a little bit is figure and ground. So if we take an object, here is a convenient bottle of printer ink for this fine printer over here that I've been working on this afternoon. That object is identified by a barcode. It gives it an identity as one of a class of assets. It is a bottle of black ink. They all have that barcode on them. This individual bottle in its kind of half-full condition, that doesn't have any legal identity beyond Vinay's bottle of half-full printer ink. So we're all familiar with that as a way of thinking about objects. Barcodes plus loose personal identifiers. Things which are inside of warehousing systems might have individual identifiers, 2D barcodes, all the rest of that, but common properties kind of floats around in this anonymous condition. So as we go through this process of, here's the digital representation of this piece of common property. In fact, if I just grab an index card here, just going to make my digital twin right now. Right, so, I don't know if you can see that. There we are. 50% full, right? There's our bottle of printer ink. Here's our digital twin, 50% full. We can add something to that has the ownership. The crudest possible form of digital twin, right? This is not fundamentally rocket surgery. Vinay's bottle of black printer ink is 50% full. You identify it by its product code. We identify it by its condition. I vouch for the fact it's 50% full. There's your digital twin. The only reason that has any kind of enormous transformative power is when you put it in the context of a blockchain. So now anybody that wants to access that object can see that I've made an objective statement, vouch my reputation or my wallet against the fact that this thing's 50% full. There's a real clear, direct story here of now we can just move this thing around, and if you become the legal owner of this thing, this thing is now nicely, cleanly identified. I have to give it to you or I'm liable. All of those models, what we have found is that a lot of people think the blockchain does this already, right? The legal interfaces for building these things out, moving them around, actually don't exist. There's almost no real support infrastructure for the legal management of digital twins as you transfer ownership of them across, say, different digital systems, across a blockchain, across different jurisdictions. If you just move them inside of even a single supply chain, the actual legal end of that stuff, people are still relying on very, very standard contract laws way of getting things done. And the problem with that is the cost of litigation on anything that involves blockchains will be enormous because nobody understands what the blockchain does. So it's very, very, very difficult for people to, resolve that in a court case. You have expert witnesses, you've got judges that don't necessarily understand what's happening until they're taught how it works. The whole thing looks like a total tar pit. And a lot of the reluctance to put these blockchain prototypes into production is that legal tar pit. And once you've got that legal tar pit, safely paved over, then it becomes possible to take a lot of these ideas, put them directly into the real world. And I think that we are pretty damn close to that. I mean, it has not been easy to get here, right? The legal complexities that we have to cross to be able to get into a position where transferring the signatory on the digital twin on a blockchain is recognized fluidly inside of the legal system as a transfer of property. Building the legal machinery to do that, without massively rewriting legislation, this has not been an easy process, right? I mean, we have been hard at work on this thing. But once you get there, that immediate fluidity, right? You move this around and this will follow it, and that's what you were paying for. um, that's going to open a lot of doors. A lot will happen. I think that it is clear that slotting that narrative into the digital twin lexicon, so many people are now speaking digital twin. We're now basically explaining this in terms of, it's a legal transfer rail, so that when you change the digital ownership, the key signing on the digital twin, the legal transfer of the property occurs at the same time. That's a pretty easy story to tell inside the digital twin narrative. So I kind of feel like this was a big missing piece of the Mattereum puzzle, that we've been sort of struggling with this problem of how to explain it and how to get it across to people. But now that the sort of wider narrative on distributed ledgers has caught up, we're now in a position where we can say, okay, well, digital twin, right? Legal machinery for moving around digital twins. It all kind of hangs together, because so much of the building of these, reporting things, if we describe this as an asset passport, right? Whereas if we say, okay, you've got your digital twin, the digital twin has a sort of legal addendum to it, which is the asset passport, which is the thing that makes it legally transferable. You need you need a physical passport to travel, a government-issued passport to travel. So if your digital twin wants to head out on the road and become transferred between companies, between individuals, across jurisdictions, your digital twin needs an asset passport, right? If the digital twin is going to be, taking the physical thing with it in its travels, the sort of notion that you need an asset passport to do that actually kind of makes a lot of sense. And I think that is about all I had to say. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about? Oh yeah. So the other thing I mentioned, I started a few minutes ago talking about figure and ground. So if you think of a ledger, right? Here we have here's a ledger book. Right, inside this thing, we have written down everything that we're going to do. I was actually handling a ledger for violins recently. One of the people that we're working with on the violin project showed us a 110, 120-year-old ledger with entry after entry after entry after entry after entry describing the condition of violins as they were traded a century ago. Absolutely amazing. So we have this ledger. The typical way of modelling these kinds of things is that the entries in the ledger were essentially the digital twin of the physical objects that were in the warehouse. It was a pretty straightforward thing. Entry in ledger, digital twin, no muss, no fuss, no messing around. That was how it worked. That was the paper equivalent of the digital twin. Once you start networking all of the ledgers, so there is just, the blockchain, and that's the universal ledger that everything's connected to, at that point, these things are still entries on the blockchain. In a sense, each one of these is like a row in a database. It's a smart contract on Ethereum rather than being a row in an SQL database or an SAP database, something like that. It's got that linkage. So that causes a little confusion, and the people think that the digital twin is in some way a different thing from a ledger entry. But to all intents and purposes, digital twins are just very high-res ledger entries. This, I think, is something where there's a little bit of narrative drift, because apparently the sort of real digital twin story starts with NASA. And the NASA model of the digital twin was that it was a digital simulator, like a flight simulator, of exactly how an engineering subsystem would work on side of a spacecraft. So when you start thinking of the digital twin as being something which is kind of somewhere between the original NASA digital twin model and a warehouse entry on something like SAP, then you put some blockchain in it, we're still in a position where that terminology is going to need hashed out. Right? We're going to find over the next few years, digital twins, asset passports kind of at one end, the people that are doing numerical modeling on the other, the people that are building it into ERP systems might have a third representation, and the people that are thinking in supply chains might have another way of seeing it. But it's all within this kind of semantic cluster where digital twin with the following attributes, you're still starting the conversation up here rather than starting it from somewhere down there. So yeah, that's what I had to say about digital twins. It took us a while to make a decision that we were going to start using that nomenclature because it wasn't clear to us that it was a good, precise enough description that we could work with it for all the things we wanted to do. But one thing and another, I think we've had to think about it. We've come to a conclusion. So Mattereum is the company that produces decentralized digital twins. Simple. Sounds right way of saying it? Decentralized digital twins on a decentralized network. Something. Anyway, decentralized digital twins. Thank you.